Welcome to the electronic archive of presentations from Performance Incentives, the Growing Impact on American K-12 Education, a national conference hosted at Peabody College of Vanderbilt University in 2008. The conference was sponsored by the National Center on Performance Incentives, a research and development center funded in part by the U.S. Department of Education's Institute of Education Sciences. You're watching a video presentation from Professor Brian Jacob, the Walter H. Annenberg Professor of Education Policy at the University of Michigan, on results from a pilot study examining teacher attitudes toward pay for performance in Hillsborough County, Florida.
So I should go back. Our paper is started out as kind of it is a pilot project. It was based on surveying teachers in Hillsborough County, Florida. And the basic idea was to get some baseline information on teacher attitudes with regard to pay for performance. I don't think in this setting I need to do much motivation, but I think our primary interest in this project was driven by the increasing focus on pay for performance within education. There's a few states that have gone big into incentive pay. The federal TIF grants are intended to increase experimentation with pay incentives in education. Although there's little systematic evidence on teacher attitudes. There's lots of scattered evidence and lots of one-off surveys of various samples done over the years of differing quality, but I think little systematic evidence on a wide range of teacher attitudes. And I think underlying this project and our kind of purely descriptive contribution here is that anytime we want to try to implement a pay-for-performance program in practice, the attitudes of those most heavily involved and impacted by the program will clearly be instrumental in the success or lack of success of the program. So this is the outline of the paper, or the outline of the presentation. Prior research. So prior research is often contradictory. You can go through, and in the paper we outline different surveys that were done by different organizations almost at the exact same point of time, finding 75% of teachers support incentive pay, and others done a week later on a different sample in a different place says 15% of teachers support incentive pay, or something radically different like this. I think it's largely been due to the fact that surveys are done on different samples and there's different quality of the surveys. There are some common findings coming out of prior research. One, that there's most support for paying teachers for extra work or working in hard-to-staff schools. There's typically been shown that there's greater support among Black, Hispanic, male, and less experienced teachers, and that there's more support among teachers with quote-unquote good principles or good leadership in their school. So our research questions were, again, largely descriptive. How do teachers view pay for performance? How supportive are teachers of different methods for identifying high-performing teachers? And this kind of gets into some of the conversation that we heard during our first panel about whether we use strictly quantitative or qualitative or some mix of measures of success. To what extent do teachers in Florida, in this Florida district, actually understand the existing pay-for-performance systems? And then how are their views related to teacher and school characteristics? So the setting is Hillsborough County, Florida. I think this is a nice setting to do the study because, one, Florida has considerable experience with pay-for-performance, and there actually were two programs operating at the time, one just ending and one just starting at the time of our survey. One was this STAR program. And then during the first year of STAR, the first year that was implemented, it was changed, which gives you some sense. I guess maybe the positive spin on that would be, as Caroline suggested, we are in a highly dynamic environment, and the system was able to adapt quickly. There might be less positive interpretations of this about face, but so it was changed to the Merit Award Program, MAP. And it was, I think, from my understanding, and I'm certainly not an expert in the Florida programs themselves, but my understanding is it was largely driven by an emphasis to allow schools to move from purely individual-based to team-based incentives, and then to include supervisor evaluations as a larger component of the assessment. So Hillsborough County has 199 traditional schools, about 200,000 students. Its demographics, I think, mirror Florida and southern Florida to a large extent. It actually is on the Florida accountability system, is a fairly high-performing district. The B grade that I took from 06-07 is actually the lower of the grades that it's gotten in recent years. It has successfully implemented a few other financial incentive programs in the past, and it was the first district to approve a pay-for-performance plan. So the research question, I guess this should say the research maybe sample or sampling frame here. The sample included all full-time instructional personnel in the 199 traditional public and magnet schools. It was a voluntary online survey. Unfortunately, based on the timing of everything, that was conducted over a 2-week period at the very end of the school year, the time where teachers are least likely and least interested in bothering with something like this. And as a former teacher, I can certainly attest to that. So we had 23 out of 199 schools did not respond at all. The ones that did respond, we got a 20% response rate, which was certainly much lower than we had hoped. So I think all of the results I'm presenting today should be taken with a grain of salt. The true concern was with non-random response, and we tried to do a little bit to look at that. It looks like there's some evidence that teachers who responded were not terribly different from teachers who didn't respond, at least in certain base characteristics. To our sample here, I'm just going to see the time, I'm going to run through it very quickly. General views. Teachers expressed only, I think, what could be generously described as moderate support. Only 50% agreed that it would be a positive change in teacher compensation. Over half thought it would destroy the collaborative culture of teaching. And only a third of the teachers thought it would actually encourage teachers to work harder. Variation across teachers. So race and gender was not associated with support for incentive pay. Younger teachers were more supportive than more experienced teachers. Actually, interestingly, middle and high school teachers were more supportive than elementary school teachers. Teachers in Black and Hispanic schools were more supportive. And then we asked some questions getting at some personality measures of teachers, including risk aversion and time discounting, as the economists think about patients. And those were correlated as well. Two things I think came out that were very interesting from a policy and implementation perspective. The teacher's view of the quality of the leadership at the school and the teacher's view of their own self-efficacy were both very strongly and positively associated with support for performance pay. This is not perhaps surprising, but I think it does, as I'll talk about in the last slide, inform how we should think about implementing pay for performance if we do so. And what should be rewarded? So teachers emphasize many typical input-based factors. There were less support for rewards based on student achievement. Although interestingly, I think an interesting finding here, I'm not sure if this is going to show up, is the last one, supervisor evaluation. Actually, 75% of teachers agreed or strongly agreed that supervisor evaluation should be included in an incentive pay program. And I think that is, well, I'll go back to that at the very end. Knowledge of STAR and MAP. Teachers, it was kind of remarkable how little they really understood about STAR and MAP, particularly the STAR program, which was supposedly in place, and teachers were being rewarded on it at the time of we conducted our survey. Policy implications. So I think the results, look at that. So I think there are several policy implications of the findings we have on teacher attitudes. One is the importance of teacher education and buy-in. This certainly was not great understanding among many of the Florida teachers that we surveyed, and arguably these were the most informed or motivated of the folks who bothered to respond to the survey. I think there might be some lessons in terms of the implementation of the program. I think Matt, who's worked extensively with the Texas incentive pay programs, points out that Florida's approach was very top-down, was not very collaborative, did not involve the It did not involve discussions or development with teachers nearly as much as the Texas model, and they are finding kind of different results in terms of teacher understanding and teacher support in Texas. I think this suggests the importance, certainly as policies are initially implementing, of allowing teachers to opt out, given that there might be different degrees of support across different teachers. One thing that showed up that I think was not I didn't highlight earlier, one of the things that garnered incredibly strong support among teachers were financial incentives to work in hard-to-staff schools. I think this has been talked about quite a bit, although in some prior work I've done, it's actually, there are many fewer policies to reward teachers for hard-to-staff schools than one might think, based on kind of the emphasis this is received in policy and discussions. I think another interesting finding that came up, one of the least supported types of incentive pay among the Florida teachers we surveyed was actually pay based on hard-to-staff subjects, which I think is going to be an interesting thing to contemplate in relation to the market forces that Mike outlined, the shortages that differ dramatically across grade levels and subject areas. I think this is, in some ways, I could imagine one of the pay reforms that would be most in line with kind of views of supporters of more market-based systems, and yet I think for equity concerns, does not have very much support among teachers. In fact, even less support than using test-based scores to evaluate their performance. And I think finally, some of our results suggest that pay for performance shouldn't be thought of and certainly shouldn't be implemented as a standalone policy. I think the results on leadership, the importance of school leadership, and the results of kind of the personal or teaching efficacy of teachers and how that relates to support for pay for performance suggests that pay for performance probably should be integrated with some sort of career ladder or professional development program, something that provides teachers the sense that, yes, they are able to meet the kind of the new targets that are being outlined for them. And I think I can end early. I think maybe, am I the first presenter? I'm out? Oh, well, okay. End on time. Okay, thank you.
A working paper and the PowerPoint slides used in this presentation are available on the National Center on Performance Incentive website.